We decided to have a fun one for the penultimate prep and data of the year, and you can see that we've got a nice Christmassy themed tracker here built in Excel by the elves at Santa's Workshop. So while it may look fun and festive, actually not the best for allowing us to do some analysis. So there are things we're going to need to change. For example, if we start off thinking about these toys that we have in Excel, we can tell very clearly which list these toys belong to, but once we read it into Tableau Prep, that becomes less clear since they're all just in the same field. So we'll need to fix that first of all. So if we take a look at the data here to verify that, then yeah, if we're looking at our toys, then it's not very clear which toys belong to which list. We're going to need to use our fill down technique in order to sort that out. And for that, we've brought in our source row number. So if we go back to the input step, just make sure on the source row number you're including that field in your analysis. So then we want to first of all extract those values that tell us which list the children are the toy belongs to. So we're just using a simple if statement to say if our toy field starts with the word number, then give us the value, otherwise just leave it as null. And then we're using this fill down, so nice and simple. In prep now, we love using it. We're wanting to order by that source row number, use that which nice list field that we just created, and you can see how it fills those null values with the correct list that the toy belongs to, sorry. And the way that I find that fill down is just going to the menu here of this field, going to create calculated field and go to fill down, and then that brings up that visual editor nicely. So then we just rename a couple of fields so that we have our which nice list field there. And then we're filtering it such that, for example, this top row here, that doesn't really add any value to us at the moment. Sure, it has the quota number in it, but we'll extract that separately. So we just want a list of our toys, so we just filter that out. So we don't want in our toy field to have it starting with the word number anymore. So now we've just got those 12 rows. So in our little branch that we have over here, we're just filtering conversely to say that we do want to include those toys that start with the word number, and then we just want to keep that number of children field as well, so that we can join those two back together. So we have our number of children and the quota so that we can multiply those together, because at the moment our quota is percentage values, and that's going to be hard to work with. So now we'll be able to multiply our percentage values by the number of children to update our quota, which is something that we do here in this step to get our revised quota figures. But coming back to the step before that, we want to take this number of children on the nicest list, number of children on the nicer than most list. We only want the word nice, nicer than most, or nicest, basically. Those are the only things that we actually care about in that value. And a really cool thing that we can do is just use our automatic split in this instance. It works really well for removing any detail between the values where we're just kind of repeating information. So we do that at this step, and then we're left with just our list field that tells us that information. Next up, we want to focus on our ELF names. So our production managers, our quality assurance, our fund level testers, and our chief wrappers. We want to make sure that we are able to identify which elves these are. So we're going to pivot these 4 fields in our pivot step here, so that we have all their initials in one field. And we have this lookup table at the top here, so that we can go ahead and look up their elf names and join them on. But the way that that looks is that we have the information, the initial, then a dash, and the name. So we want to split those up so we have the initial and the name side by side. We want to split up our initials that we have in our elf name field so that we have the first initial using the left function and the second initial using the right function. So for example, how this works is that if we come back to our elf name lookup table, then my initials are JM, so my elf name would be Frosty Peppermint. So there we go. Frosty Peppermint would be my elf name in this instance. So hopefully you have a bit of fun with that too. So we need 2 joins here. So we join on the first initial and then we join on the second initial. It doesn't matter that we're losing some of the rows from our elf name lookup table. Maybe the we just don't use those values since we only have 48 different elf names anyway. So the fact that we're not getting a duplication of rows means that we're all happy to proceed with that. So now we can just make our elf names. But before I do that, if I just find in the elf name JM and just check that that's worked. So this join is coming on the second initial, so Peppermint, that's correct. And then the name from the first one is the J, so that is Frosty. So Frosty Peppermint is coming through the way we'd expect. So we just need to write a quick calculated field to add those two together with a space in the middle. And now we have that here, as I can see. So awesome. All working how we want it, and now we want to just filter that data down to just our production managers, since they're the ones who are actually responsible for the number of toys being produced. So we just want to click on that, say keep only, and that's what we're filtering in this step here, and then just removing any unnecessary fields and doing a little bit of renaming of our data. Now it comes to deal with this really wide data set that we're working with. We've got 56 fields, which is really wide and difficult to look across. So we're going to pivot our data again. So we're going to use a wildcard match for our pivot, where we're looking for the dash. So that gives us all those dates coming down into rows instead of columns. And then we're wanting to look at over time. When does the toy go from being under production to overproduced? So when does it hit the quota, basically? So we are going to need this field here to actually be a date field, because it doesn't start off that way. It just starts off as 1-May, for example. So we'll add on 2023, so it knows that it is in the year 2023, and then change the data type to a date. So that we can then use that as an ordinal field to calculate our running sum. And then with our running sum, we're just going to our toys produced, we're going to the create calculator field, we're doing a running calculation, and that pops open this visual editor for us. So for each toy, we're grouping by each toy, we're ordering by our week field, we're compute using our toys produced, and we're using a sum, so we get that running total across the weeks of how many toys have been produced. And then we just do a quick calculation to check whether our running sum is above our quota, so we can work out when our toys become over or under produced. Sorry, when they hit the mark where they're over the quota. Because these elves aren't necessarily managing things at the moment, so certainly some of the toys go quite over production. So let's give Santa a way to quickly reconcile, are they actually going to be okay for Christmas Eve when they're shipping out all the toys? So rather than looking at individually by weeks, we're just going to sum up all that data. So grouping by a list, number of children, toys, and quota, and summing those toys produced just to know the totals that we have for each of those toys. And then work out if anyone's under quota, so minusing the quota from the toys produced. And oh dear, we see quite a lot of toys are under and quite a lot of toys are over. So we now need to check and sort of reallocate some toys. So based on the list that child finds themselves on, they might need to be switched to another toy from that list. So if I go to my total by list, then I want to know if I'm using a fixed LOD and I'm grouping by the list, I want to sum the toys produced to check, do I have enough for each of the children, or does the child need to get a toy from a better list potentially? But looking at this and then doing this calculation, we see actually that it's all okay. We have fairness going on. We've actually overproduced in all the lists, so we'll be okay to just reallocate which toys may need to have their quotas adjusted. Maybe they were easier toys for the elves to make, which is why they made so many of them. So then we just need to shift that around a little bit. So we're going to find out in each of those lists which toys had the most overproduction. So we can see that here. So for example, if I look at this one, then you can see that if I then look at this value here, then this is on the nicest list, then this bike was made a lot more than any of the other toys in that category on that list. So we'll just update basically when that is the case, when our toys over or under quota equals the most overproduction, then we want to minus the overproduction value from those toys produced. So that means that they are taking on all of those values, they are now updating, so that we, rather than just using the quota amount, we are now going to use that many toys in the shipping to the children. So we get rid of some fields that we don't need, and we work out the spare toys as well. So we're just doing the toys produced minus the toys ready to be gifts. So we can see that now this matches up to the overproduced for these three categories. So for that, for this one that we were looking at earlier, then we can see that this matches up with, there were 11.5 million toys that were overproduced, so we've got 11.5 million spare toys for that. And now we're ready basically to provide that information to Father Christmas so that he can get out there and deliver all those toys. So we could even do a quick visual check, because this certainly confused me a little bit. So if I just group by the list, sum up the quota, and then sum up the toys ready to be gifts, then I can see that, okay, phew, we've made those all equal. So we are reaching our quota. So that's a nice visual check for us as well, before we do ship this off to Santa. Cool. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this festive challenge, and I hope you will have a very happy holidays.